Our next speaker, he is part of NoBox. He does policy work and research. Let's please welcome Dr. Yarcia. Everybody give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Rod. Thank you, Rene. Parang kinabahan ako na ako yung susunod kay Rene after that. I don't have any baon na jokes. I'm supposed to be the education side of the Komedyukasyon. But I'm hoping, since I have some friends here, test of friendship, kapag nag-joke ako, tatawa kayo. Good evening, everyone. So, I'm Lee. I'm also from NoBox Philippines, and I do the policy and research aspect of the organization. So, since last year, with Ines and the rest of the team, we've been doing drug policy reform work. And the war on drugs, as we came to know it since last year, we've learned a lot of ridiculous things coming from the policy responding to drugs. And being a millennial, despite my receding hairline, I'm still a millennial, friends. Thank you. I thought I wanted to outline some of those things na we should rant about, we should call out. Millennials are popular for complaining about everything. And I thought I'm part of the millennial group, so I want to complain about some of the ridiculous policies that we have right now in the country in relation to drugs. So what are those things? The first thing is about Oplan Tokhang and the surrenderies. I'm sure you've heard about the policy of knocking sa doors, coming up with a list of people who supposedly surrendered. Kasi pag hindi sila nag-surrender, they'll be incarcerated or maybe matutokhang sila found in the streets. The policy right now is they'll be placed in a list and the government will come up with some responses so that they will stop their use of illicit substances. So what are these things that we see? Some of them are placed in Zumba classes. Kasi the understanding is, wala namang ginagawa ang mga drug addicts eh. So, bigyan natin sila ng something to do. So, let's do Zumba every afternoon. Or, some of them, the understanding is, wala kasi silang trabaho. So, let's put them into livelihood seminars. Or some of them, I think, by moral failing. So, let's do Bible studies. I'm not saying in isolation they might not be helpful. But when we look in the ground at the real implementation of the policy, they seem very ridiculous. For example, we went to some communities and there are people with legitimate jobs. They do 8 to 5 jobs. Some of them do shops, some of them work in an office. But because they had a history of drug use, they had to report to the police, to the local government, and participate in livelihood educational seminars. So they were complaining, may puro trabaho naman kami, bakit ganito yung problema? One was even saying I had to file a leave of absence so that I can attend a livelihood seminar because the government thinks that what's missing for them is really livelihood. Another would say, lalagpas na ako sa langit, kakabasa ng Biblia every day. But the perspective being perpetrated is the reason why they're using drugs is either because they're not doing anything or because there's some sort of moral failing. Now, this is the education part, so medyo boring side ko. But when we look at the real evidence, thank you friends, when we look at the evidence behind drug use, we know that it's not a simple issue of moral failing or a social problem. It goes beyond that. There are published studies done here in the Philippines. Some use drugs either for a recreational purpose, experimental purpose, but many would use drugs as a sort of a functional purpose for them. The farmers, the port workers, the drivers, they would use it so that they can have longer hours, so that they could work longer hours. Some would use methamphetamine so that they could suppress their hunger and so they could provide for their families. We've heard, I've personally talked to some people who use drugs, and from my background as a doctor, I know that drug use is different for different individuals. And there's no clear association of using drugs that you're going to be a criminal or that you're a morally bankrupt individual. And this is one important, ridiculous fact that we should point out. when you listen to the news, it seems, gumamit ng drugs, we should judge that person, we should treat them in a different way, as in they're infantilized, as if they don't have agency to control their own lives. So that's one ridiculous thing that we've noted on the ground. What's another ridiculous thing? Because it's a real and ridiculous war on drugs. We noted that in schools, there is a policy that when you use drugs, the schools will either implicitly kick you out or expressly kick you out. When we think about an educational institution, it should be a system that should provide support to the individuals. But since the mindset right now is an absolute prohibition, we are creating more out-of-school youth instead of capacitating them and providing them with the tools so that they could address their drug use, whatever issues surrounding their drug use. We are creating a system that prevents them from being empowered and enlightened so that they can address some of their problems. So medyo magiging serious na ata. Hindi ko na alam kung paano i-go back, but I'll just go on and rant like a millennial. Thank you, friends. And it seems very illogical. When you think about it, the drug policy is designed so that we can help citizens come up with a way to resolve issues surrounding their drug use. But at the moment that we punish them and we do not provide systems of support, then we create more problems in our society. What's the third ridiculous thing that we know? Since last year, we've noted 67% increase in incarceration in our jails for drug-related offenses. The idea is, gumagamit kasi sila ng drugs, maybe if we punish them, they'll fear using drugs and therefore will solve the problem of drug use. But studies would show we have higher incidence of drug use even after incarceration. Because you don't address the reason why they're using drugs and you just place them in prison. Right now, kapag you have a history of drug use, what will happen is you'll be placed in the same cell with people who've committed murder, who've committed rape, or some of them, the proposal in the Congress right now is, if I'm not mistaken, 100 grams yung for death penalty. If I'm not mistaken, Budi, just correct me if you know the right path. Budi is he's the education part of NoBox. So, the policy of incarceration is ineffective. We know that if your goal is to prevent people from using drugs, you don't hit that goal with the current policy of just putting them in prison without understanding the reasons why they're using drugs. The more targeted response should have been, if the reason is an economic reason, then it should be a targeted policy that supports them economically. Is it an educational issue? Or perhaps it could be a public health issue. Should there be some sort of social or health care? Then we're talking not about a ridiculous war on drugs, but we're talking about a scientific and evidence-based policy. And at the same time, people who are placed in prison, their conditions are so, it's amounting to torture. When in Bikutan, you know how many times, pag maliligo sila, the policy, because there are a lot of them, so the policy is 7 times lang sila pwedeng maglagay ng tabo. Or for some prisons na can house 4 to 6 people, it's almost 30 people in the same cell. Or people who are taking sleeping shifts. Parang, ikaw muna matutulog at tayo muna ako kasi wala na tayong space dito. So mamaya ako naman yung matutulog. It's a ridiculous policy that we put people for simple drug use or possession in jails and it's not working, but we're putting people in a situation that harms them more. What's I think the most ridiculous thing that we've observed since last year is the rhetoric is, let's do war on drugs so that we can save more lives. But since last year, this is under debate with the government, but since last year, the latest data is that we have 12,000 people who are either homicide from government reports or killed because of drug-related issues and concern. When we were in the field, we met one victim of the war on drugs. The story, what happened was, yung husband niya sells vegetables every day. Wakes up 4 a.m., goes to I forgot where he buys the vegetables, but he goes there and then goes back to their place and then sells the vegetables. But he had a history of shabu use. So, nung nagkaroon ng tokham, he had to put himself in the surrenderies list. And then one day, the police came, knocked at the door, and said, "Oh, gumamit ka ng drugs. Nasaan yung drugs dito? Pakita mo sa amin." He could not show. He said, I've stopped using it since way back. And then the wife was saying that the husband was hugging the feet of the policeman. The policeman shot him from the top. And this is a father who had some children to raise. When we tell these human stories, it seems not just ridiculous, but it's really abhorrent already. It's being labeled as a policy to fight for the right to life of many, but in practice, it seems that's not really the case. All these aspects of drug policy are about punishment. They're about looking at the person as either a morally bankrupt person or with criminal tendencies, and the approach is punishment. But for tonight, NoBox is asking everyone, is it possible that we change our mindset from removing the policy of taking them out of the school, putting them in prison, killing them, to a more supportive way that is more scientific and evidence-based? I think the call for tonight is support, don't punish. And it might seem very ridiculous, but as a millennial, we should rant about it. And there's another term, millennial, for the older ones. Parang hindi naman millennials na. For the millennials, I hope that we all carry the same message. It is time that we support and not punish. Don't punish, SDP, because it's not effective, it's really ridiculous, but it's time that we become more humane. We look at others as not as a person who is going to hurt us, but someone that might not be even problematic to begin with. Or if there are problems, then we address those problems. I think that's it. I don't have any more jokes. Actually, wala na ako jokes, pero I hope I shared on the education part. Thank you very much, everyone.